I'm excited to talk to you guys today about building a different path and really talking about differentiation within Google Classroom. Google Classroom has a bunch of different great tools, but one of the ways and one of the perspectives that you can look at it with is through the eyes of differentiation in terms of assigning different tasks for students. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that involves. So it looks like the objectives for today really want you to understand how to create individual assignments, assigning specific students individual or small group assignments in Google Classroom. We're also then going to dive into interactive Google Forms, which I'm sure many of you have used before, but looking at it through this lens of building in some active opportunities for reteaching so that students get a chance to relearn the material that they may have missed. And then finally, we're going to take a quick look at choice boards, so how to create them, how to use them, and then grading them within Google Classroom. So we're going to try to cover a great bit of land here in terms of material. So if you do have questions, feel free to add those to the chat. So as we go through, I'm just going to walk through the concepts. I'm going to try to show you how this works and looks through different screenshots, and I'll try to explain it along the way. And then we'll go out of this Google Slides presentation into a live Google Classroom environment and try to explore the different skills that we learned, and you're more than welcome to follow along in your own. And then if as time allows at the end, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. So with that, we will go ahead and jump right in. So one of the great pieces or tools within Google Classroom is creating individual assignments for students. And so as you go in and you create an assignment, or if you want to edit an assignment that's already existing, you can go in and in the screen change who the assignment is assigned to. So if you're creating a new one, you may have to select which classes you want it to apply to. So I will say, if you sometimes it's really easy for me if especially in a high school or in a middle school environment where you have the same class, the same contents being taught across 2 or 3 or 4 different Google Classrooms, you can just assign it and select it to all of those. But the one thing that you can't do then is assign it to individual students. So to do this part, you'd actually have to open up that assignment that you may have created, and you may have assigned it to multiple classes. But you can then edit the assignment and then only assign it to the students that you want to have it. So as seen in the screenshot here, you can assign it to 1 or 2 or every student. And so this is just a really quick and easy way to create assignments for other students. I'll point out here that when you do this and you only assign it for 1 or 2 students, then it disappears or it does not appear at all for the other students. So Stephanie, in this example, would not be able to see the assignment that was assigned to Tammy and Deborah, if that makes sense. So that's pretty simple, and we'll walk through sort of that. Some different ways that I've used it in the classroom is, if you have students who need a quick refresher, maybe they missed a couple days, maybe there are a few students that were out because of they were on a field trip, or they were sick, and there were a couple different students that instead of loading them up with a bunch of different work, maybe there's one assignment that could suffice for that. I've assigned it that way. I've also assigned using this tool for small groups, so if each small group gets a different assignment, this is a way to assign it to those students, so then when they log into Google Classroom, they see who they are assigned with, and they are working on the same project or product. So that's another way to use it as well. Let's see. So the next part, that was again a really quick look, but now we're going to kind of dive into the forms, and this is maybe the more involved and detailed part of the presentation today. So first, I just want to talk about the anatomy of a Google form. I'm sure that we've used them and seen them or participated in them. They're pretty ubiquitous and many people use them. But for the purposes of this, we're really maximizing every single piece and part of a Google form. So I just wanted to break it down really quick. You see that toolbar on the side, and that pops up basically anywhere you click into a Google form. So just to run that down, most of the time we just click the plus button, which adds a new question. But you can also import questions from previous forms. So if there's another Google form that you're like, yeah, I really just want to grab a few questions from that form, you can do it using that tool, which is really, really convenient if you're making different copies or modifying copies. It's a really great way to do that. You can also add a title and a description, which allows you to add some additional text and context for students within your form. You can add an image within the form, so if there's a picture that you wanted to add or a visual that's required to help answer a piece of the form, that can be found there. You can also add a video from YouTube, and the key part that we're going to talk a lot about today is adding a section, which sections off your Google form into different parts, or chapters as I like to think about it. So as we dive in here, I've started to build a quiz, and so just trying to pick a pretty basic trivia question, but as you can see down in the bottom right hand corner of that question, once you open it up, there's an opportunity to click on a menu, and that's what popped up in front. And so you can select go to a section based on an answer. So based on the answer that's selected in this Google form, you'll have the opportunity to send them to a different section. So for example, Christian Bale would be the correct answer here, and so you can see they go on to section 3, which is question number 2. For if they selected an incorrect answer, they would go to a section which I've titled help for number 1, so that it's pretty easy to identify then when you're trying to pick, because it can get complicated if you're adding a bunch of different questions. So obviously this works best in forced choice formats, and it allows you to send folks on. I don't believe that it's really possible with like short answer or things like that, but this is great for these kind of short formative assessments. And so based on what they select, the students would then go to the next page based on their response. So if they ended up needing help for number 1, I've embedded a video, as you can see here, a clue in the title of that video, so that hopefully it will help them. And then I've re-asked the question, of who is Batman in the Dark Knight. And so this then allows them to select the right answer, hopefully. You can make it so that it actually loops and sends them back, or in the case of this example, I just had them continue on to the next section. So I don't have go to a section based on an answer here, but there is a correct answer, and it will record that information. So if you send that test to 4 students, you can monitor their individual answers. Google Forms collects it, and you can actually create it into the easiest way for me to ever look at it is through a Google Sheet, and so you can have all of the answers go into there. So let's say 3 of the students missed the question, 1 student got it right. This question, who is Batman in the Dark Knight, will actually show up twice, once for the original question and once for this re-asking of the question. For the person who got it right, the second column, or the second question column, will be blank, and the others will then have the opportunity to put in their answer here. So you'll be able to tell on the reteaching and after they've watched this video to help guide them, did it help? And so hopefully that will help you trigger, okay, well, even after this quick reteaching that's sort of automated in a way, did they get it or did they not? But that's a good question. So I wanted to also show you another option that I like to use a lot especially when I used to teach at the high school level, high school social studies, but this would be applicable for anyone who finds Edpuzzle or other resources to be helpful, which is you're allowed to embed links. So remember the tool that we talked about with the title and description. I'm able to use that here to encourage students after they answered number 2, and if they missed it, to watch the video at Edpuzzle to continue. And so at that point, at the bottom, instead of re-asking them the question, I'm just asking, did you complete and watch the Edpuzzle assignment? Or it could be, did you watch or participate or read through the Amplify Science curriculum or the page or assignment that I linked to here. So again, this is a great way to not only just incorporate video, but you're immediately sending them to a direct resource that you would have them use in your room. So again, this is a great way to just sort of check and make sure that they are getting it. The other nice thing about the Google Sheets element that I mentioned earlier is you'll be able to go through and see how many students answered this part. If they didn't, if they just try to continue on through the assignment, you'll at least be able to sort that column and get a list of the students who participated in that extra activity. So hopefully, if you're using Amplify, it would be something that they would be able to turn in, or at least you'll be able to track. Or the other alternative here too would be to ask a secondary question or another question, or re-ask the same question, but some way to keep them accountable and keep them on track. But this is a great way to kind of add to and make it automated. So if they didn't get it right, that's okay. We're going back in, and it's part of developing that growth mindset as well. So that was a little bit about forms, and I think it'll make a little bit more sense maybe once we jump into the live demonstration, but I just wanted to walk through that and how I've used it, and a little bit about the technical aspects of how to actually create one. But I think that technical part will make more sense once we actually do one together. But one of the other pieces that I really enjoy making for students and really try to get them involved in is building a choice board. And so a couple of tips that I've found to be helpful as I've built a few through the years is really sticking to the standards. So every mini activity, and I sort of tend to think of choice boards as being sort of that tic-tac-toe looking board that has some different activities that students can choose from. But every mini activity should be directly tied to the academic standards in your objective. So making sure that it's fitting what you want to cover within that lesson or within that unit. Sometimes I would have the choice board be a little bit bigger in terms of the time, and so I'm hoping to cover multiple objectives. Sometimes each column, if I'm making them pick an activity in each column, would cover 3 objectives, but just making sure that each activity is directly tied to the academic standard that you want to cover. Also providing multiple paths, being creative, allowing for students to kind of build their own way to demonstrate the knowledge, because that's ultimately what the choice board is about, having students demonstrate the way that is easiest for them to show, yes, I understand and know how to do this and what this means. And so allowing them as many different ways as possible is great. I found that students there were some that really loved to write and really express themselves best through writing, so they'd rather write an essay. But there were others who would prefer to work on more creative projects like acting it out and recording a skit, or creating a screenplay, or a poster or a brochure, or different things. They're small, but again, allowing students to create some different options. And now with more and more technology being available in the classroom, there are more and more opportunities for them to create a video or create a website or a mini site that allows them to express the same information. And the other part too in building a choice board is really making sure that you have really clear instructions. Otherwise, of course you have 9 different projects running at the same time. Everyone's not doing all 9, but someone in your class is probably doing at least one of each possible choice. So making sure that the instructions are clear helps prevent some of the follow-up questions that you may get from students, and it's really key from trying to pull the chaos out of your room. The first time I did it, the instructions were kind of vague, and I kind of tried to leave it open for them, but when you leave it too open, it becomes less clear. So adding some clear instructions are really helpful to make sure that students are able to complete the task that you want them to. So again, part of grading or creating choice boards or grading them, which can be a little overwhelming because, again, you have 9 different products that could be submitted. So again, some keys: assigning points equally, making sure that the students pick projects that have the same point totals, and with that, the same amount of work. Sometimes students like to put a little bit extra because they're really excited about some different ideas and opportunities, but I always tend to remind them, it's the same as this, so just make sure you're putting in the amount of work that you feel like you would put in for these different activities. And hopefully you're designing your activities that match and fit those point totals. I also liked to create mini rubrics. I didn't do it every time, but sometimes I would just create these small little rubrics that would go with each activity that basically clarified for each student, here's what I'm looking for, here's how you're going to earn your points. If you're creating a website, I need to see some written content, I need to see some multimedia images and videos that you may have embedded, and I need to make sure that it's clearly laid out and it's organized. And so from that, I would create the rubric and they would see how many points, and that's what I'm looking for. So again, it's pretty small, but it allows you to create that. And keeping it simple. So students are going to try to be juggling 3 different products too. I mean, you're juggling 9 as a teacher, they're juggling 3. So again, keeping it as simple as possible in terms of the grading, and making it as clear as possible, sometimes with these mini rubrics, are really, really helpful as you're trying to embed this within your classroom. So one of the parts that Google Classroom allows you to do is actually create rubrics within your project. So within the assignment, if you create a rubric, you can develop this. And so it's very laid out. So in this example, the first criteria is citations. You can talk about what that means, or sourcing. How are you citing your evidence that you found for this project? You have to assign points, so you could do 4, 3, 2, 1. You could do 10, 9, 8, as many as you want. Again, simpler is better, so the fewer options that you have, the easier it might be. And the level, title, and description would basically be like mastery or developing or novice, apprentice, those kind of titles that we tend to think of when we see rubrics or scales like this. And then you can describe what it looks like in each. So it allows a lot of granularity in terms of what these rubrics look like. I find these rubrics really exceptionally helpful during essays and writing products. But yeah, this is a new element of Google Classroom that has been added within, I think, the last year, that now allows you to grade and develop these rubrics. And the cool thing is, especially for papers, but even for other projects, if you tend to use the same rubric and the same criteria, you can actually reuse a rubric that you've created before. So it's really, really helpful in terms of grading and scoring and keeping it consistent, and so that students see the consistent feedback that you're providing through Google Classroom. So that's really helpful. Now, the one thing is, you can see there are a lot of boxes and a lot of different things. One of the options that it gives you is to create your own Google Classroom, or your own rubric in a Google Sheet, and then import it. So I'm sure you may have heard of Alice Keeler, who is a Google Classroom, Google technology or education technology guru of everything. And she's created this rubric, and you can actually get a copy of it at the URL on the screen. But it allows you to just type in what you want everything to be. You can change the point totals. You can change the description, and it automatically will import correctly, so that you can just do it here where everything's kind of very clear what goes where and how it looks. So it's really, really a neat way to do that. Importing it's really easy, and then once you've got it, you can import it and reuse it however often you need to. So I just wanted to point that out as a really great tool in terms of how that works. Well, I am finished this first phase of our training. So if anyone has a question as we transition into the live walkthrough, I'm happy to take a question. You can either put it on the chat, or if you want to talk out, you can.
We're all caught up in the chat, but if anybody wants to unmute or type a new one.
Brison, you may have answered this, but on the assigning the sections based on what they answered, does it have to be in quiz form, or can it just be a regular Google form that say I would use something like Flubaroo to grade?
You can use Flubaroo to grade. It may lead to, because you've got some questions that are going to be answered and some that aren't, it may get a little confused, or it may mess with your point total. So it's just something to look out for. But as long as you have a mental note of, how many points it's supposed to be out of, if you answered everything correctly the first time, that may be helpful. But yeah, I believe you can still use it with Flubaroo.
How do you create your choice boards?
So I will actually show you an example of a choice board that I've created. I just put it into a Google Doc. So I basically just created a table. In fact, I'll go ahead and walk through that first, if I can switch my tabs. So here's one I created on the American Revolution. And basically what I do is I'll create it and add it to Google Classroom as view only, so they can see this. They can't edit it. It's not like they all need a copy. They just need to be able to see the instructions, and so that way there's a pretty clear identifier in terms of what the projects are and what they can pick from. Now, one thing I will point out here is I try to make it a little bit more intensive in terms of they have to choose something from each column, so that is one part of it. But the red boxes at the bottom are all writing tasks, because I needed them to create a writing product. So I would just have in the instructions, I said you need to choose at least one from the bottom row, but one from every column. So sometimes students would get confused and they'd be like, well, do I have to make a tic-tac-toe? Like, do I have to get 3 things in a row? And I would always say, no, you don't have to do that. You could pick mini biography, which is in the bottom corner, the crossword puzzle, which is in the top middle, and victory song. And that's all you'd have to do. So again, I just sort of built it using a simple Google Doc, and that way I'm able to link to templates if I needed them to, or guides, or rubrics if I'm using extra rubrics or mini rubrics that I'd mentioned before, or primary sources in this case for this social studies activity. So that's sort of how I had it work.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Someone else have a question? Okay. Well, I'm going to jump into how we look at creating the individual assignments to start with. The students in these classes are actually teachers at Jesse Clark. So if they look familiar, that would be why. But we've created some different classwork in our internet resources, Google Classroom resource sharing page. And so you can either create a new assignment and name it whatever you'd like to name it. And again, this is where if you start selecting multiple, you'll see how the all students kind of grays out and you aren't able to select it. So this is where if you're creating an assignment that you want to assign to individual students, so let's say you came up with an enrichment activity that is for the the high flyers in your class, and each class might have different ones. You can create it. Everyone will see it at first. if you do it this way. So every student will see that assignment. If you're doing it, say the night before, or if you're scheduling it, they wouldn't see it until it posts. But then you'd have to go back into each class and edit it so that each student is assigned correctly. But for the sake of this exercise, we'll just assign it to this class, and then we're able to select the students here. And again, like I said before, if I only select one student, Deborah would be the only one that would get to see it. Stephanie and Tammy would not, which is, one of the great things too, if you're assigning extra work or if you're doing it that way, it creates a little bit less friction in the class because you're just asking them to work on Google Classroom. And so they kind of assume, especially at the start, that everybody sees the same thing. But of course, as the teacher, sometimes you have to assign different work for different students. It does kind of become a little bit of classroom management or grade book management to try to how to factor in some of this work. But beyond that, it's a really great feature to use. So that's basically how that works. Are there any questions about how to use it or when you use it? Okay. If not, we will go ahead and dive into the Google form, which is maybe the more complicated part. So, we've seen this section where you're building out the quiz and you're creating the questions, and then based on their response, you can create these jumping points. It's also a good way to build like a choose your own adventure kind of activity for students as well, in case you're feeling extra creative. But in this case, for differentiation, you can then build these various parts. So we've created question number 2 and help for number 2. So let's walk through how we build another one. So for right now, we're going to add another section. And where did it put it? Oh, sometimes when you don't click in the right spot, it will change it. So you can actually edit and see where everything lies right now, and then you can click and drag and move and reorder sections if things for some reason get out of whack. So like I'm doing there. And so now it's at the bottom. And now we have question number 3. And the question here is, try to make it simple, something that I know the answer to, and we'll add some options. Okay, so we've got some options. You can click and add a answer key so that it's tracking that with points. It doesn't do that automatically, so you'd have to go and do that for the questions that you wanted to ask. I do want them to answer it. It does need to be required. And so now we click this menu and we've got this go to section based on answer. So we don't have any other sections built yet, so I don't have anything labeled, but know that we're going to come back and change this. Now we're adding another section, and so this would be the help for number 3. I would strongly encourage you, as you're building these for the sake of going back and trying to figure these out, title them in a way that would make sense to you. I try to use the question number 3 and help for number 3 as sort of go-to titles, but if you try to make them creative and things, you may forget which one goes with which question, so that's where that would come in handy or be important. And that's for this one. We're going to add the clue of visit the website to learn more. Oops, if I can type, about the school. And this is where I'd put the website. So it does not, I will say, if you put in a website, it will look like it does not work, or that it's not hyperlinked. But when you actually preview the page, it will work, and they'll be able to click on it and go directly there. And so at this point, then we can actually go back to this question. If we want to re-ask it, you can copy or duplicate the question, and we will just drag it down so that we've got the same one. So now that we have this section built and we go back up to the original question, you change which section it goes to. Since we already turned that on, if they missed it, they go to help for number 3, and we'll need to change this one for that. But let's say this is the end. We're done. So this is the last question on my quiz. Instead of having them go on to some further section, you can actually change it so that it submits it as soon as they hit that answer. So that allows you to end the quiz and it's over for those students. So that's a really quick way. I just went through it very quickly of how you add sections, how you assign them, to change where they go to, and how to add whatever you'd like. You could also add in a video if you wanted to from YouTube, or if you have the URL for the YouTube video that you wanted them to watch, that's an option. If you wanted to add a hint image, you could do that as well. I don't believe that there's a huge restriction on how long the description is, so if you wanted to type out or copy and paste something in as a hint or something to help refresh their memory, you can do that as well. So again, there are a lot of different options in terms of providing assistance for students as they're going through this, but that would be the primary way to do that. I'll pause here because this is some more complicated stuff, but I thought I'd show you hands-on how that works. Any questions?
Yeah, so you made it to where it's submitted kind of automatically once that last question is completed. I'm sorry, I haven't worked with the quizzes much at all, so I don't know. Wouldn't it be more convenient to allow students to review their questions? It's not automatically submitted, but they actually have a chance to go back and maybe, is that a possibility?
Yeah, so you can actually change it so that they can edit their responses. So if you wanted to, you could have them edit after they submit, so they could go back and review if you wanted. But the reason why I actually changed this one to be the submit form would be so that they already, if they've missed the question, that means that they're going to go to this page and they're going to get a chance to review. But if they got it right, then and they'll see, oh, you finished, and that means you got it right.
Okay.
So
thank you.
That's sort of the logic behind it. But yeah, you could do it a bunch of different ways in terms of how you wanted that to work.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Any other questions? If you think of something, add it to the chat. But I did want to show you how this rubric scoring guide works. So this is, when you go to that link, it'll create the copy, and so you'll have this. And I will revert back to the original version just so that we're starting from the beginning. So this would be what you would see. So it looks like there's just one here, and you might think, I have to copy and paste. Actually, what it does is, as soon as you type in a title, it will automatically populate the other stuff. So small description, and so every time you use a box, it will let you know what it's doing. I like it how she already has in her template the labels for each tier of scoring is already added to this. So there is an option for, you could edit these and change what they are, but she has it formulated so that it automatically does that. But let's say I've added 2, or I only want 1, and so you could just go back through and highlight and delete it. So just so that you know how that form works, because it threw me off the first time I used it. But yeah, this is a really simple way to just go through and add this. And then if we are adding a rubric over in Google Classroom, here's how you do that. You can either create the rubric or import from Sheets. And so if that's what we're doing, you can just find the Google Sheet and add it. And now it pulled it in with our citations and the small description, and you've got all of it here. So, and even the second one that I hadn't deleted yet. So again, that's how that works. And so now it sees, okay, this is 10 points possible, 10 points possible. So it looks like it's out of 20 points. And the cool thing about this being in Google Classroom is that you will be able to, the students will be able to see how they scored on the rubric, and you don't have to worry about stapling and attaching, you know, paper rubrics or hard copy rubrics. The students would be able to see it right away, which is a great option. So what I would suggest, because I mentioned the whole mini rubric things and how to collect, you know, there's a question of how you collect choice board activities in Google Classroom, because they can create lots of different things. The biggest key would be making sure that whatever way you want to collect it, it's really clear for students. So what I tended to do was I would create 3 separate assignments. So especially if I'm going to do, to go back to this example, you know, I might create one I might call the activity American Revolution Choice Board, column 1, Road to Revolution. So whatever activity they did for the Road to Revolution, they would just be able to add that assignment to their Google Classroom submission. The other way to do it here is because I actually gave this red row down here at the bottom some additional points because it was a longer writing assignment. So these were actually worth, I believe they were, at the time they were worth 20 points, and the other boxes were worth 10. So in that instance, I might make that, you know, your red row column or your red row assignment. So the written assignment, and I try to make sure that was really clear, and that's where they submitted that work. And then the other 2 is, you know, American Revolution Choice Board project number 2 and number 3. So that way I would at least be able to provide the correct point total for the students to try to clear that up as well. You may want to use rubrics for that. You may want to, you know, let's say for the writing assignment, they are going to tend to be the same kind of product, and so the rubric may apply because they're all written tasks. So you may want to use the rubric on that one and not on the others. So again, that's sort of up to however you would like to have that work. But in this case, I believe that when I created this assignment for students, it was allowing them to submit the written assignment separately, so that had a specific rubric attached to it, and then the other assignments were just 10 out of 10 points, and I used my own sort of mini rubric to score it on my own, and then I gave them that feedback in terms of Google Classroom comments. So that's how I handled it. But again, as you build your Google or your choice boards, that could show up, that may not work for you, and so you may have to find a different way. But that was what tended to work best for me. The other option too is you can just create one assignment and make sure and tell them they need to upload and attach all 3 things to their task. So for example, I would have a student attach a Google Doc that was their brochure or their digital brochure. I'd have a student attach another Google Doc with their writing piece, and then they may also add there's an option to add a link to any assignment or to any submission. So they would just add a link to their Adobe Spark webpage, which I believe there's another training on that coming up soon too. So all of those are options, and that way they submit everything at once. So again, you can handle this whatever makes the most sense to you. But that's the nice thing about Google Classroom, is it's flexible in that way. Well, I don't have anything else specifically to show at this point. Again, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. but I'd like to thank you for showing up and spending a little bit of your Cinco de Mayo with me as we walk through these different options in Google Classroom.